Just seeing the girl before her, Bota knew she would be less capable than her to take a knife to the man's throat. Not only was the chubby princess physically weak, her emotional attachment to the person who raised her as a caring father could easily make her reconsider the necessity of the act. Poison was the next best option. Once it was placed, it could not be removed. Alba didn't know where exactly to start. No opportune moment could be found from her view. There were little distractions inside the dining room, and at least 2 guards were potentially eyeing every single movement of hers. It had to be an event, a big one, where everyone was too busy to notice a relatively small person slithering through the masses of guests and target an unsuspecting servant. The servant in question wasn't picked randomly. He held the plate specifically made for the man to be assassinated, so it would surely arrive in the right place. And the servant looked tired with those dark rings under his eyes and a shaky step. He didn't bat an eye as she sneaked up on him and told him about the so-called medicine the king was supposed to consume, but refused. Just moments later it turned out he hadn't heard her all the way and brought the poisoned plate to the wrong place. This was Alba's first failure. The second time she wanted to be more precise. The storage room was easy to access before they had changed out the locks, so she targeted something not a single person but her father with a likeness for exotic delicacies would consume. At least, so she thought. She should have done it before the guests arrived to dine with her and her father. They were old friends from his side that visited. An elderly woman he had spent part of his childhood in the castle with was especially delighted by the visit. Her similarities to the king had been her doom, and for the first time Alba could see the immediate effect of the godly poison. Nothing had ever horrified her more than the sight of seeing someone's body turn against itself and reject any kind of liquid in an instant. It was because of her father's poor talent of drawing conclusions and speaking verdicts that kept Dew alive that day. If it had not been that way, Alba would have never been able to wash her guilty consciousness away. 4 people dead due to her failure would have been 4 too many, and 3 she could already barely take. The girl was ashamed of herself, miserable, and caught in the act. If it hadn't been for Dew's tiredness and the mild reaction towards the poison, he would have scolded her. There were thousands of opportunities, most with a relatively high success rate, but she had chosen the stupidest ones. But he let her go after she had explained the situation to him and sealed the deal. Then he went to sleep. The following morning the people were chattering more than usual. When asking what had happened to cause such a ruckus, a guard leaving his patrol post answered, "The princess fell down the stairs and broke her arm. Poor girl." What a silly lie, but good for him. The last thing he wanted was to be miserably beaten to death by a couple of royal followers to the crown because she had been too stubborn to fall properly, an art to be learned and appreciated. Then he wondered if she had talked to Sue already. He had promised to tell no one but her aunt, which immediately caught her attention. Of course, nobody had let her know of her relation to the only female knight, who was also aware of one of the biggest wrongdoings of the king. Alba had begged him he would give her her aunt's name, and when she learned that the woman was in the manor at that very moment, she promised she would go and talk to her in person. He had agreed. Sue should know that one of her only relatives left was on her side, and that she wouldn't have to lick the shoes of the person she hated for much longer. Dew arrived at the kitchen, and a terrible stench immediately flooded through his lungs. He wanted to vomit. Before he could ask if something had died overnight, he saw the source of the smell in the direction of the old woman. And no, Edith had not died, she was just sorting out mussels. At least a dozen of them must have rotten during the time of waiting to be eaten, because the cooling chambers outside offered no more cold than the common storage room. "Did the plans for the breakfast change?" he shouted across the room. "Did you not hear the news, sir? The princess broke her arm." "And what does that have to do with mussels?" Breathing through his mouth wasn't any better, as well he learned. "It's common sense that the flesh of mussels help the healing process," she proclaimed with a certainty that almost convinced Dew to believe the statement. He shrugged it off. No matter what he would say, Edith would not reconsider. But she did tell Dew to throw out the stinking, unusable shell creatures before they could kill the entire population of the Holiday Manor. Afterwards he wasn't sure whether the smell was still coming from the others, if it was just part of the room now, or was united with his sense of smell for the rest of the day. Even after he had delivered the plate to the princess and went over to the courtyard, which was warmed by the pure sun rays for the first time since their arrival, he couldn't escape. He was handed a second plate and had to go all the way back to the king's room, which was a corner away from Alba. There was no little wagon to put the food on. He smirked and put the food on the ground before knocking and disappearing. Maybe he should spit on it next. He went back around the corner and headed for the staircase. Not looking to the side where another corridor was meeting the main one, Dew ran straight into Avery. Not saying a word, she guided him outside by holding the collar of his shirt before noting, "You smell interesting. Did you fall into a barrel of fish or what? Tell the chef she should learn real medicine instead of following traditional myths. Her recipe will probably stay in everyone's nose for the day." She understood, but only after reaching the kitchen with him she fully comprehended the extent of the murderous stench, and her greyish face looked as if it had gotten even paler. "You look like a corpse." "I would probably vomit if I had something in my stomach. It's almost as bad as the flesh piles," she explained miserably. For some reason Avery still stayed to help him finish up, perhaps to save him from having to endure the place for all that much longer. There was a silent agreement between the two of them that they would go as far away from this place as possible afterwards. And they did. Avery didn't even bother to change out of her guard uniform, and she wasn't wearing his in the first place because no one would notice it anyway. They took a stroll along the same path which led to the chapel, but she insisted on taking a turn to the right, where a parallel path was located. The only difference was the closeness towards the coast. It went slightly upwards, and the further they walked, the higher the distance between them and the coast below came. To Dew's concern, Avery was balancing right on the edge of the rising cliff, as if it didn't exist. But her mood seemed decent. "I talked to Aaron, and he managed to place me on the entrance most of the time, but just now Berta asked me to help her move a shelf because she accidentally knocked a silver pocket watch behind it while dusting off." She chatted away while dodging one of the thin trees which grew on the small stripe of grass that separated the path from the precipice. "I don't know why she still works here. She's almost 70 and can barely see nor hear. I wonder how she's still alive. Maybe a good diet?" "Probably prays regularly," Dew added jokingly. "Bota is said to be a goddess of healing as well, so why not? That's the reason for all of the borage growing in the royal gardens all the year round, for healing purposes. At least that's what Harold told me." Harold. Dew had heard the name before. The man used to spend time with Avery while out on the battlefield. He hadn't heard anything about him for a year or two, so he assumed Harold had died from injuries. "Do you believe in all that stuff?" "The goddess or the plants?" she wanted him to specify. He shrugged, so she replied, "Borage has proven itself useful for some health issues like seizures. When it comes to Bota, I think she could possibly exist but be less of an all-knowing and perfect creature like people think. I imagine her to be more like a shapeshifter with less limitations when it comes to taking on a different appearance and extra abilities like healing or fast travel." "So basically like you?" Dew asked. She stared at him a little confused before it appeared she remembered that she had some of those extra abilities. "Oh, maybe similar but more and better. I'm lucky I haven't gotten stuck inside a wall yet." And then Avery vanished. Dew rushed towards the spot where she had just been walking. Only some loose rocks were left, which broke off one by one and fell into the depth to hit the ground around 20 meters below. Of course it had to happen. She practically challenged her luck by talking. Dew's eyes searched the ground, unsure whether he would see her hanging on by a dent in the cliff or find a figure lying motionlessly on the hard pebbles below, with her face crushed and all 6 limbs stretched into all directions. Oh, 6 limbs. Wings. She could fly, at least a little. Avery landed next to him with her ginormous bat-like wings open and a bit of a guilty facial expression. He punched his fist into her shoulder. She lifted her hands. "In my defense, even if I had hit the ground, that wouldn't have killed me. My first time was higher up, and all it did was make me unable to move for a month." And therefore you don't have to worry?" Dew dragged her back to the path by her sleeve, had her walk on his left side, and to ensure her staying there, he took her hand as well. He couldn't care less if she was sure it couldn't kill her. Having 20 broken bones was already bad enough, and even worse if it could have been avoided. The mention of her first attempt didn't make it any better. Avery had downplayed the scenario a lot when she first told him about it. It was a couple of hours after her brother had left her and an elderly couple had found her laying somewhere in the woods, no mother or father or anyone else to take care of the child. Her body had been practically cooking from the fever, and the couple took it upon themselves to try and help cooling it down. They spent days, maybe weeks, trying everything in their power, while Avery had been lying motionlessly in their bed, with eyelids almost too heavy to even blink. Then she had fallen asleep, at least she described it that way. It was a long sleep in which she couldn't receive any input from the outside world. It was all nothing, not even black. As she woke up, everything was still black, but her eyes were open, and it wasn't blindness, because she saw something instead of nothing at all, but that something was darkness. She had tried to move, but there was barely any room to do so. It didn't take long for her to figure out that she had been placed in a wooden box, and shortly after seemingly breaking free, that she had been buried underground with that wooden box. How exactly she managed to get above ground she didn't remember, just that there was basically no air to breathe and that she had almost lost track of where to go. How was one supposed to know where up and down was? Somehow she managed to surface completely. Her last memory was the autumn forest in which she was found. Her first one, after being able to breathe again, were the daffodils blooming on her grave. It was the third factor, after the box and the knowledge of being underground, that made the child feel distress. Then there was the man of the elderly couple who arrived an hour or so after. He saw the person he had believed to be dead sitting on her own place of rest, whining, "I'm not dead, I'm not dead." The man screamed in terror. Monster. It wasn't a human child he remembered finding and caring for. This was a monster, and he ran, crying out that there was a devil who had possessed the corpse and wanted to damn them all. Avery had not been able to understand what had happened and why the elderly man who used to be so kind to her was filled with terror after seeing her alive, even if not well. It changed after the mob arrived. Many men and women with various makeshift weapons in their clenched fists who rushed through the rows of graves, rushed towards her. She heard their screams. "A devil, look at those horns. Those are the eyes of a cursing fire. It wants to take our reincarnation." Avery had reached for her head. Horns? She didn't have horns. Scales? Yes. Weird muddy green eyes that didn't match the rest of her features? Yes. But horns? In terror she felt a hard bone-like structure growing out of her skull. And she ran, not for her life but for those of the village people. She didn't want to hurt them or whatever had changed her to be what she was now. She wanted it gone, so she wanted herself gone as well, and she climbed the hill, not knowing where to go and what to do, while tears were making her vision unclear. It had been afternoon when she had begun to run, and it was early night when she stopped. The salvation seemed to be right before her. The abyss. It was about 50 meters deep, rocks at the bottom and going straight downwards. Yes, she thought with desperation, this is it. And she ran and she jumped. An 11-year-old child took a leap off the edge of a cliff because the poor people of the village somewhere in nowhere made her believe she was the problem and that she had to go to ensure safety. Avery had her eyes closed while her body dashed towards what was relief from the pain of the fever and the devil inside her. She waited to hit the ground and for everything to vanish in an instant, as her soul would be torn out of her body to make its way to whatever came after death. But it didn't happen like that. She felt herself being torn back, as if a string attached to her spine was pulling against gravitation and reducing the speed in which she was falling, but she still kept falling. And then it was as if her bones were thrown on top of an anvil as a ginormous hammer was swinging down at them. And it hurt. And she bled, and it hurt, and she couldn't breathe, and the night passed, the rain came, the rain stopped, the night returned, and the next day came. Dew could see the healed tears on her wings, and he had felt the almost unnoticeable imperfection on her collarbones and ribs from when they had been crushed and healed too well to be real. Maybe he had to believe gods existed in this world. If that were the case, he knew Avery had to be one of them. They continued walking. He held her hand tightly. She didn't protest. She held one of her wings above his head to protect him from the sun. She couldn't be a devil.